I don't think anyone begins a marriage imagining they'll one day be the villain of their own story. I certainly didn't. When I married Paul, I was convinced I had found the kindest, most grounded man I would ever meet. He wasn't flashy, he wasn't ambitious in a showy way, but he was steady. Steady in a world where everything around me was loud, competitive, political, and increasingly exhausting. I worked as a director at a tech sales company, the kind of job where everyone smiles but no one really means it. Promotions were currency, connections were power, and burnout was practically a badge of honor. When I met Paul 5 years earlier at a friend's cookout, he felt like the complete opposite of the world I dealt with every day. He was warm but sarcastic, confident but simple in all the right ways. We clicked instantly. Our chemistry was ridiculous. The kind where you can't keep your hands off each other and laugh through nights you probably should have spent sleeping. 18 months later, we were married and living in a big apartment, planning a house, planning a future. The first 3 years were happy, stressful at times, but happy. We traveled, we saved money. We built routines that made sense. But people don't fall apart suddenly. They crack slowly, quietly. My crack started at work. I was being pulled into long hours, intense meetings, high-pressure presentations. Every day felt like a performance. And little by little I started to change. I became defensive, irritable, and overly protective of my time. I told myself it was just stress, that it would get better after the next promotion cycle, after the next quarter, after the next deal. It never did. Paul traveled for work too, usually 1 week every 5 or 6 weeks. It wasn't constant, but it was enough to create space between us. He'd come home tired, I'd be tired, and neither of us really communicated how lonely that made us. It wasn't that we didn't love each other. We just weren't paying attention to the tiny distance forming between us. During that time, a senior executive at my company, let's call him AP, started becoming more involved in my day-to-day work. At first it was harmless. Meetings, emails, quick check-ins. Then it became coffee breaks. Then venting about office politics. Then complaining about stress. Then laughing too hard at each other's jokes. Then noticing compliments. Then craving them. AP wasn't better than Paul. He wasn't nicer or more genuine. But he was present in the exact empty space where I felt invisible. I was lonely, exhausted, and honestly, emotionally stupid. I let the wrong person slip into the cracks instead of turning to the man who actually loved me. There wasn't some dramatic moment where I consciously made a choice to betray my husband. It happened in a gradual blur of bad decisions disguised as coping mechanisms. The night everything crossed the line, I was already mentally gone. Paul was on a short work trip. I had a corporate dinner with AP and a few others. The evening ran long. There was wine, pressure, flattery, and the toxic combination of exhaustion and validation. Outside the hotel, after the dinner, AP leaned in. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't passionate. It was a stupid, reckless escape that I didn't resist because I was too far into a version of myself I didn't even recognize anymore. That night, I made a mistake that would follow me for years. After that, guilt became my shadow. I told myself it was a one-time thing. But the secrecy, the lies, the late nights, they snowballed. AP and I didn't have some grand relationship. It wasn't love. It wasn't even lust after a while. It was just an emotional addiction mixed with stress relief and terrible judgment. Paul noticed the changes. Anyone would. I was coming home later, being weirdly protective of my phone, shutting myself in the home office under the excuse of work emergencies. He never yelled. He never accused. But he watched me carefully, like someone trying to understand something that didn't make sense. The first sign, he really suspected something happened over something so small it still haunts me. I had gone grocery shopping after work, rushing because AP and I had been together earlier, and I was flustered. When Paul helped carry the bags inside, he reached into the back seat and found a pink bra under the passenger seat. It was mine, and it shouldn't have been there. He froze. I froze. The world froze. He held it for maybe half a second before silently placing it in the bag of groceries and walking inside. No questions. No scene. No confrontation. Just silence. And his silence was worse than being screamed at. That night, he barely said a word. I went through every justification in my head, why it was there, why he shouldn't panic, why he should trust me. But I couldn't bring myself to give any explanation at all. Everything I could have said would have been a lie anyway. A week later, he tried something I never deserved from him. He tried to save our marriage. I remember coming home one Friday evening to candles on the table, real plates, real silverware, a beautiful dinner, a bottle of wine, flowers, an entire evening he planned from scratch. Something he never did often, which made it even more meaningful. And I ruined it. I told him I had to go to a work outing. I didn't even hesitate. I just said it, grabbed a quick shower, and told him I'd eat a snack before leaving. He went quiet in a way that made my stomach twist. The look on his face wasn't anger, it was disappointment. Deep, crushing disappointment. I remember him standing there, looking at the table he set, and telling me he was sad that I never wanted to do anything with him anymore. I should have confessed right then. I should have broken down and told him everything. But instead, I brushed him off and left. What I didn't know was that before leaving, he tossed his work phone into my car. I never saw it. I never suspected it. And that night, he tracked me. He watched me walk into the bar. He watched me leave with AP. He watched us go to the hotel. He watched us walk inside together. He saw everything. And instead of confronting me, instead of dragging me out, instead of screaming, he left. Not that night, but emotionally he left that very moment. Over the next few days, his behavior changed. He was quieter, cold, detached. He slept on the couch. He avoided eye contact. He barely responded to me unless necessary. Finally, one evening, he looked straight at me and asked, "Are you having an affair?" I lied. Instinctively. Automatically. Shamelessly. "No." "Why would you ask that?" He held my gaze for a long time. A very long time. And then he just walked away. I didn't know it yet, but that was the last time he ever trusted a single word that came out of my mouth. He spent the next week packing small things while I wasn't home. Clothes. Tools. Personal belongings. He was preparing his exit in complete silence. I barely noticed. A week later, I left for a business trip. When I returned, the apartment felt hollow. Something was different. Something was wrong. His closet was empty. His shoes were gone. His toiletries were missing. His desk was cleared. I ran into the kitchen and found his wedding ring sitting on a small piece of paper with 4 words. I hope it was worth it. I collapsed on the floor, sobbing so hard I couldn't breathe. I screamed into my hands, begged for time to rewind, begged for a chance to fix what I destroyed with my own stupidity. Paul didn't answer my calls, or my texts, or my emails. After a few days, he changed his number completely. It was like he had evaporated from the world. Meanwhile, the consequences I had ignored came crashing down. Someone in the office leaked the affair. AP's fiancé found out. There was chaos at work, investigations, gossip, whispers. AP blamed me. He ended things instantly. My reputation tanked. I was quietly pushed to resign. Within a month, I had lost my husband, my job, my dignity, my stability, and the person I once was. But losing him wasn't enough. I needed to find him. I needed to see him once more, even if it meant he'd tell me he hated me. And that's where my search began. The first week after Paul disappeared felt unreal. I kept expecting him to walk back through the front door, drop his bags, and sigh about something trivial. Traffic, flight delays, the weather, anything. My brain refused to accept that he was truly gone. I'd wake up reaching for him, and every morning hit me like a fresh tragedy when my hand landed on cold sheets. By the second week, denial wore off and panic took over. I called him over and over until his number stopped ringing altogether. I emailed him paragraphs of apologies, confessions, explanations. None of it made sense. All of it was desperate. I wrote things like, "Please talk to me and let me fix this," and sometimes even, "I deserve whatever you want to say." I didn't even know what I was trying to accomplish. Maybe I just wanted to feel like I wasn't drowning alone. When he changed his number, it felt like the last door closing in my face. I tried reaching out to his father. He barely responded, just a short message saying Paul was fine and that I should give him space. That was it. No further details, no sympathy, no hint of where Paul had gone. My days blurred together. I stopped cooking, stopped leaving the apartment, avoided mirrors. The apartment felt haunted. Everything reminded me of him, the empty spot in the closet, the quiet living room, the faint trace of his cologne on our bed sheets. It was torture, self-inflicted and deserved. I didn't know what to do until one afternoon when I walked into a coffee shop I used to visit sometimes. A mutual friend named Stacy worked there. She used to adore Paul. She also knew us as a couple. I hadn't seen her in months. When she spotted me, she froze. At first, I thought she was just surprised, but then I saw something else in her eyes. Guilt. Or maybe anger. Or maybe she simply knew more than she wanted to. I walked up slowly, unsure if I even deserved to approach her. "Hey," I said softly. My voice cracked from days of crying. "Hi," she answered, stiff as a board. I didn't waste time. "Do you know anything about where Paul is? Anything at all?" Her lips tightened like she wanted to say no, but the truth was sitting on her face before she even opened her mouth. Paul had seen her recently. I could tell. "I really can't," she started, but I cut her off, my voice breaking again. "Please, Stacy. I'm not asking for his address or details. Just tell me if he's okay. Tell me if he's safe. I'm going crazy." Her jaw clenched. She looked around the cafe, like she hoped someone would interrupt and rescue her from this moment. When no one did, she sighed heavily and lowered her voice. "He's okay," she whispered. "He moved somewhere outside the city, near some mountain town. That's all I know." The relief hit me so hard, I almost cried on the spot. "Do you know where exactly?" "No," she said quickly. "Paul asked me not to tell you anything. He was really clear about that." It felt like my chest caved in. Paul didn't just leave me, he made sure I had no route back to him. And still, I couldn't blame him. "Thank you," I whispered, because she didn't owe me anything, not even this small crumb of hope. For the next 3 days, I barely slept. It was like I had suddenly been given a compass, but no map. Somewhere in the mountains. A town. A hint. That was all I needed. I packed a small bag one morning and drove north with nothing but blind determination. I tried all kinds of towns, small coffee shops, downtowns, grocery stores, diners. I scanned faces, walked through parks, wandered through outdoor trails, hoping for a miracle. I'd sit in coffee shops just watching the entrance, imagining him walking through the door, imagining what I would say first, imagining whether he'd even look at me. Weeks passed. I was careful. I didn't want to chase him, ambush him, or humiliate him. I just wanted one chance to talk. One moment where I could look him in the eyes and say the apology I hadn't been brave enough to offer when I still had the right to speak to him as his wife. One afternoon, while walking past a little cafe in a town I had almost given up on, something made me stop. I couldn't explain it. Just instinct. I turned my head, and through the window, sitting by the glass with a laptop open, was Paul. It hit me like a punch to the stomach. His hair was a little longer, he had a short beard, his shoulders looked stronger, and he had this calmness around him that I didn't recognize. He didn't look broken. He didn't look angry. He looked at peace. Happier than I had seen him in a long time. Happier than he ever looked with me toward the end. I couldn't breathe. I didn't go inside. I didn't run to him. I just stood there for a long moment, taking him in, memorizing his profile, tracing the familiar curve of his jaw with my eyes. Then I walked away quickly, tears streaming down my face. I wasn't ready. Not like that. Not when he looked so steady, and I still felt like a shattered mess. I left the town immediately. I cried the whole drive home, sobbing so hard I had to pull over. There was no anger in me, no bitterness, just the realization that I had ruined the life of a man who genuinely deserved better. But fate wasn't finished with me yet. A couple of weeks later, I was back in that same town, more out of hopelessness than strategy. I'd bought groceries from a local store and was heading back to the parking lot when I heard someone shout across the street. "Paul!" I froze so Hard my bags nearly slipped from my hands. I didn't say it. Someone else had called his name. And that meant only one thing. He was nearby. I turned slowly, and there he was, standing across the street, turning toward the voice, scanning the area. And then he saw me. His eyes widened, disbelief flashing across his face. Time slowed. Cars passed between us. People walked around us. But all I could see was him. I took one small step forward. He didn't move. I walked closer, carefully, cautiously, like approaching a wild animal who might bolt at any sudden movement. When I reached him, I instinctively leaned forward just a little, as if my body expected him to hug me after a year apart. He put his hands up immediately, stopping me cold. "Don't," he said. Just one word. Calm. Firm. Final. That single word shattered me more than all the silence of the past year. We ended up sitting on a bench outside a shop. He kept space between us, not rude, just protective of himself. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't angry. He was just closed. Completely closed. "What do you want from me, Kathy?" he asked quietly when I finally managed to say his name. I don't know," I whispered. "Just a conversation. A chance to apologize. A chance to explain." He didn't respond right away. He just looked out at the street, like he was trying to decide whether I was worth even that much energy. "Explain what?" he finally said. "Explain why you decided I wasn't enough? Or why you walked out on our marriage months before I ever left?" "I never walked out," I choked. "You did," he replied softly. "Long before I packed my things." The honesty in his voice hurt worse than yelling ever could. I broke down crying then. Not dramatic crying, just quiet, horrible sobs that I couldn't hold back. He didn't comfort me. He didn't touch me. He didn't even look at me while I cried. And that made it worse, because once upon a time, he couldn't go 5 minutes without putting an arm around me if he thought I was upset. "I'm sorry," I finally managed to say through tears. "I'm so sorry, Paul. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just needed you to know that every part of this was my fault." "That's not news to me," he said calmly. He wasn't being sarcastic. He wasn't being cruel. He was just being honest. We talked for a while. Well, I talked. I confessed everything. Every mistake. Every moment I regretted. Every selfish decision I made. He listened quietly, expression unreadable. When I was done, he said something that broke me all over again. "I appreciate the apology," he said, "but it doesn't change anything." I nodded because he was right. Nothing I said would change the past. Nothing could undo what I had done. But I still wasn't ready to walk away. "Can we talk again?" I asked softly. "Just not today, but sometime." He hesitated. A long, heavy pause. Then he nodded once. That nod became the only thing I clung to after we said goodbye, and he walked away from me, disappearing into the quiet mountain streets. But it wasn't closure. It wasn't forgiveness. It was simply the smallest door left open. And I wasn't ready to let go yet. In the days after seeing Paul for the first time in over a year, I couldn't think about anything else. The way he looked at me, guarded, distant, a little sad, but unbreakably sure of himself, haunted me every night. I replayed our conversation until every sentence felt like a needle. I knew he hadn't forgiven me. I knew he hadn't let me back in. But the fact that he didn't walk away the second he saw me, that tiny mercy felt like oxygen. I emailed him a few days later. Nothing dramatic. Just a simple message asking if we could talk again, maybe over dinner, somewhere public, so he wouldn't feel cornered. I told him I understood if he didn't want to. I told him I wouldn't push. He didn't respond right away. I checked my email so many times that I started hating myself for it. But 3 days later, at midnight, a reply came. "Dinner is fine. 1 hour. Somewhere public. No expectations." It wasn't warm. It wasn't hopeful. But it was something. We agreed to meet at a small restaurant in town the following weekend. I was so nervous I almost canceled twice. I wasn't afraid he'd yell or hurt me. Paul had never been capable of that. I was afraid of seeing him look at me like a stranger again. When I got to the restaurant, Paul was already there. He looked relaxed, sitting on the patio in a plain t-shirt and jeans, sipping water, like this was just a casual evening for him. I felt out of place immediately, like I was intruding on a life I no longer belonged in. He stood when I approached. Not for me, just out of habit, the polite reflex he always had. He didn't hug me, didn't smile, but he nodded.
"Hey," he said.
I sat down, forcing my hands to stay still on my lap. We ordered simple food. I barely touched mine. Paul ate slowly, calmly, like he was in control of the whole moment, and I was just trying not to fall apart. We talked, not about the past exactly, but around it. I asked how he was doing. He answered vaguely. I asked about his work. He said it was fine. I asked if he liked living out here. He nodded and said it was peaceful. I didn't want to ask about whether he was seeing someone. I didn't think I had the right. Eventually, after too many pauses, I took a breath and said, "I know none of this fixes anything, but I'm glad you agreed to meet." He gave a small shrug. Closure matters, even if forgiveness doesn't. That line hit me hard, but I appreciated his honesty. I didn't deserve forgiveness. I knew that long before he said it. After dinner, he walked me to my car. He didn't rush. He didn't act uncomfortable, but he also didn't make any effort to prolong the moment. Before I opened the door, I turned toward him. "I haven't been with anyone since you left," I said quietly. "I'm not saying that to get a reaction. I just want you to know the truth." He didn't flinch. "That's your choice," he said simply. "But it doesn't change what happened." "I know," I whispered. "I just want you to know I didn't replace you." He looked away toward the street, hands in his pockets. "Kathy, I didn't leave because you found someone better. I left because you chose someone instead of us. That's not something I can unsee." The truth of that cut straight through me. I nodded, wiping my eyes before the tears could fall. He exhaled a long, heavy breath. "I don't hate you. I just don't have anything left to give you." My voice cracked. "Can we talk again sometime? If you ever feel okay with it?" He didn't answer right away. After a long silence, he nodded once. "Maybe. But you need to understand it won't mean we're getting back together." I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I just accepted the little piece of honesty he was offering. When I drove away, I cried again. Quiet tears that slid down my face and dropped onto the steering wheel. They weren't tears of hope or despair. Just acceptance. He wasn't mine anymore. He probably never would be again. But at least he didn't hate me. Over the next few weeks, we exchanged occasional emails. Short ones. He wasn't affectionate or emotional, but he wasn't cruel either. Our conversations were careful, almost polite. Sometimes he asked about my job search. Sometimes he mentioned something small about his day. Nothing deep, nothing meaningful, but enough to remind me he didn't want to erase me completely. At one point, I asked him directly, "Would you have forgiven me if the situation were reversed?" He thought about it before responding. "Maybe. But it would have taken years. Counseling. Boundaries. Transparency. And I don't think our marriage ever would have gone back to what it was." His honesty stung, but it was fair. During this time, my own life shifted again. I got a job offer in another state, far away from the city, where everything fell apart. A fresh start. New place, new people, new beginning. But part of me hoped that maybe, before I left, Paul would agree to see me one more time. I didn't want a last attempt at reconciliation. I wanted to say goodbye properly, not through an email, not as a ghost haunting his town. I emailed him, telling him about the job and asking if he'd want to meet before I moved. I kept it gentle, not pushy. I told him I understood if he didn't want to. His reply came a day later. "Come by next weekend if you want. We can talk." I felt a strange mix of hope and sadness. It wasn't a reunion. It wasn't a chance to fix anything. It was simply a moment of humanity between two people who used to share a life. When I arrived that weekend, he didn't bring me to his home. He made that boundary clear. Instead, we walked through the town center. The weather was warm, the sky clear, and everything felt painfully nostalgic for something that no longer existed. We talked about small things, then about bigger things. He told me he was doing well, that living simply made him feel grounded. He said he liked being outdoors more, running trails, working with his hands. He looked healthier, stronger, calmer. I, on the other hand, confessed that I was still working on forgiving myself. "That's your journey," he said. "But it's not my responsibility anymore." He wasn't being harsh. He was just being honest. We sat on a bench near a quiet street. He looked at me for a long time, like he was searching for the right words. "Kathy," he finally said, "I'm glad you came. But I want to be clear. I'm not going back. Not now, not later. I've worked too hard to rebuild myself. And I don't want to reopen wounds that took me months to close." I nodded slowly. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just accepted the truth. It wasn't rejection. It was reality. He continued, "I don't know if we could ever be friends. Maybe someday. But right now, I need distance." He stood up and I knew it was time. I reached for his hand, not to hold it, just to touch it one last time. He didn't pull away, but he didn't hold on either. Just a brief, soft moment that felt like a goodbye to the life we once shared. "I loved you," I whispered. He swallowed, eyes dropping to the ground. "And I loved you," he said quietly. But love wasn't the problem. Choices were. That line will stay with me forever. We parted without drama, without a final hug, without any scenes. Just a quiet walk in opposite directions. I didn't look back because I knew if I did, I'd fall apart. A week later, I emailed him one last time. It was long, honest, apologetic, vulnerable. I told him I wished him happiness, peace, love, everything we couldn't be for each other anymore. His reply was short. "I appreciate you reaching out. I wish you well. Take care of yourself." That was the end. I moved to the new state shortly after. New job, new apartment, new routine. I'm not healed completely. Maybe I never will be. Regret doesn't vanish. It settles into your bones. But I'm learning, growing, trying to become someone I should have been back when Paul was still mine. Sometimes I wonder if he'll ever think of me again. Sometimes I wonder if he reads old emails or remembers small things we used to laugh about. But I don't dwell on it anymore. I don't cling to the idea of us. He deserves happiness, peace, and a life untouched by my mistakes. And I'm learning to build my own life, not as the woman who cheated, not as the woman who lost everything, but as a woman who finally understood what responsibility and love actually mean. I don't expect forgiveness, but I carry the lesson every day. And that's the end of the story.